My name is Jesus Llamazares from Consalia, running the sales frequency, where we tune in, tune up, and help you sell smarter. So today we are diving into a question that keeps resurfacing. Is sales training even fit for purpose anymore? And we love historical tips, and we have a very good one for you today. So, John H. Patterson was a key figure in the development of modern sales techniques and business practices. He purchased a small cash register company in 1884 and renamed it as National Cash Register, what we call now NCR. Under his leadership, NCR became a pioneer in sales training techniques, customer service, employees' welfare programs, and business management practices. And Patterson is often credited with creating the first formal sales training school and introducing innovative business strategies that influence modern corporate culture. Very, very interesting. I think he was, teaching objection handling, memorizing scripts, and customer interaction. So what we see is that 140 years later, salespeople still seems to be struggling with the same issues. Yeah, we'll start to talk about that in a few seconds. But joining me today is Eddie Guevara. He is our brilliant head of marketing and part of the soul of Sales Frequency, jointly with George, which is in the back today, and at Consalia, and a recent graduate of the Masters in Leading Sales Transformation. Good morning, Eddie.
Good morning, Jesus. Thanks for having me on. It's always nice to be on the other side of the production, and thanks for sharing the historical fact. It will be good to dive deep into whether or not anything's changed from 140 years ago.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure we still need things. So you've been doing some digital listening ahead of today's episode, I know. And then instead of coming today with some news, we wanted to hear from what the trainees are talking about, right? So what did you find?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I've taken a different kind of approach for this episode, and I've been scouring the internet to see what sort of main challenges salespeople are talking about in some of these digital forums. And I came across a really interesting thread, and it's probably one that is still spoken about quite a lot, but we often forget it. But the title of the thread itself was "Is Sales Training Dead in 2025?" Right?
Oh,
Quite a bold question there.
yeah.
But then when you go down and you read some of the comments, you see really brutally honest comments of frontline opinions. I've got a few here. Let me just read them out to you, and then maybe we can discuss them in more detail. So the first one is a lot of the onboarding was pretty much copy and paste from what someone before me used 10 years ago. So that was the first one. The second one was they trained me well on CRM, but not actually how to sell. Interesting. Third one, no one really gave me feedback. They just said to make more calls. I think that's that's
It's a
one that
common
most
one.
people hear.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Um, Fourth one, trial by fire works better, which is a really interesting line. I think we'll dive deeper into the crux of that sentence later. And the last one, which I guess kind of hit a nerve at the Consalia HQ, is I don't need mindset talks. I need someone to teach me how to get past gatekeepers and close deals. So 5 very, very interesting quotes from these public forums where people are talking about sales training and the effectiveness of onboarding, etc. But I think from these quotes, you can sort of hear the frustration in the words that's being used. It's quite clear that much of the sales training today hasn't really adapted to how selling is changing. There's still a big focus on tools and activities, and there's
Yeah.
kind of little attention given to what we know works very well within coaching and critical reflection. But like I alluded to, that last one kind of hit a nerve in a way. I don't need mindset talks, and I think that one really stands out because I feel, and I'm sure lots of people at Consalia will feel the same, is it's probably where the biggest misunderstanding still sits. The fact that mindset and values and beliefs are exactly what drive behavior, particularly in how you sell, right? So do you, Jesus, do you hear similar frustrations when you're speaking to sales leaders at all?
Yeah, definitely, very much so. And A lot of leaders believe they've delivered training, but when you unpack it, it's often pro dumps, system training, or generic techniques, and almost none of it addresses how the salesperson is actually thinking or developing as a professional. If you think about that, most of your comments are connected to the tools, so
Mm.
maybe to the technology, or some of them maybe to the processes, but it's not talking about the people, right? And
Yeah.
people should be in the center.
Yeah, no, exactly. And probably the thing that a lot of people don't realize is, what's missing within this whole kind of old school model of training, is exactly what a lot of people grew up with. It might be from 140 years ago, like you were saying at the start, right? But has this let me flip it on you, right? So you've been, through various kind of sales training and onboarding earlier in your career. What was that like for you?
Yeah, many times it's transactional, heavily focused on product and processes, right? Very little on coaching, no structured reflection, and it always felt like sink or swim. I mean, this is what normally we find in many conversations. Of course, depending on the customer or the company, this situation is different, because some companies more focused on consultative sales from the beginning might not be so transactional, right? They are more focused on values. But when these companies have this kind of sink or swim scenarios, you either survive or not, right? And
Mhm.
and if you struggle, then the assumption was you were not good out for sales, but this is not really true, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, of course. The whole kind of sink or swim culture, you hear it from a lot of people, particularly even on some cohorts that I've listened into. That kind of culture is still well alive, and um, you know, it's happening right now, right? Which I guess brings us to why so many reps, salespeople, kind of feel let down by the training, right?
Yeah, that's true. I think if we think about if we think back on history, um, we can think about that initially maybe they were more transactional selling than transformational, so
Hmm.
not as such consultative selling. But when the services start to arrive, so because 140 years ago, let's take it, you buy items, right? So it's not
Hmm.
something that you do consultative sales so frequently. But during the 20th century, consultative sales, not just in consulting companies, but in other kind of companies, start to come. So then a different sales training is to start to, be required by these companies. So let's
Hmm.
be clear: sales training is not that. It's just transforming across all these generations. But I think it's been badly misdiagnosed many times.
Yeah.
Let's go back to your comment about trial by fire works better. What's your take on that, Eddie?
Yeah, it is interesting. And just to go back to what you were saying, before I answer the question, yeah, 140 years ago, a lot of people were probably doing the transactional kind of selling mode. And I think just the way that the world has developed and the complexities of like buying committees, etc., and the need for people to kind of, or companies to change in the VUCA kind of world, um, it does demand a different type of sales training. Um, and it goes on to your point around this quote, right? Trial by fire works better. Um, which I kind of understand, right? You got to just throw yourself in the deep end. But when you kind of reflect back on the quote itself, you kind of think, well, actually, that mentality is kind of like saying, you know, the best way to learn how to drive is to throw someone onto the motorway during rush hour and hope that they survive. And hopefully that person survives. And yeah, you're gonna get some experience. You're gonna know how fast to go on a motorway straight away. You're gonna know when to brake, etc.
Yeah.
By instinct. But like, I think what's the the important thing to remember there is that whilst you might be successful in that, you might also build dangerous habits. You might crash. You're not building the foundations of what you actually need, right? And I think that's why we at Consalia are um, so heavily invested in foundations, in mindset, in values and beliefs, right?
Yeah, you
Um,
you're very right, Eddie. Because if I take your analogy with the roads, maybe you learn how to drive here in the UK just in a motorway, just and you think that you're doing well, right? And then
Yeah.
you're maybe you're dropped in Italy or in Brazil, in some place, and maybe you screw everything up, right? So
Yeah.
it's it's not just about. I mean, of course, you have to go to the real world and fight against the environment. I mean, just work with the environment and make a win. But there are different setups, different environments, and probably this go through different avenues to navigate with, right? Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's it's very interesting. I love a good analogy, and I think that's a good way of kind of putting this whole trial by fire works better quote to the test, right? But I guess in modern cases, this whole trial by fire mentality gets sold as like tough love, like a badge of honor, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's true. I mean, we hear a lot of times that we want more activity, we want more calls, right? Ac- Activity is easy to measure, right? But leaders confuse activity many times with capability. I'm thinking about one small history I have, which is we were in one of the last telcos in Europe. I will just not to mention talking to the strategy, the VP of strategy for the whole region, and the strategy team were focused on we have the data, we have the data, and the VP of strategy said, well, okay, you have the data, but the important thing is not to have the data; it's what you do with the data,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
Here is the same thing. It's not to have the call; it's what you do with the calls, right?
Mhm.
So if someone makes 100 calls, it feels like progress, but that's not development. It's the illusion of development. So
Yeah.
we need to really have a very much understanding of what is the purpose and what are the next steps to get to the goal, because the goal is not to make the goal, right? Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then there is this one. You said, I don't need mindset talks. I need someone to teach me how to get past gatekeepers and close deals. Wow.
Yeah.
Why does that mindset continue to dominate? What do you think?
It's a very interesting one. It's one that I didn't just see it in one forum. I saw it in multiple comments across the board. But to answer your question, yeah, I'm not too sure. I think it's probably a symptom of a lot of variables there. Um, there's stuff around short termism, perhaps a lack of patience, lack of care, maybe even pressures from like those in the higher ups of the company. But it's really interesting as well because it's not just one thing that I've read online, and that's what that's shaped my belief. It's a lot of what we also hear within the cohorts that we run. A lot of salespeople kind of have that same mentality towards um, selling. They just want to get it done, right? But I think what we learn, especially in the masters program, is when you don't start with mindset, you don't start at the core of the values and beliefs area, you kind of end up like I mentioned earlier, falling into the bad habits, right? And
Yeah.
essentially not selling to customers in a way that they actually want to be sold to, which is what our CEO Philip Squire talks about regularly. It's essentially why the MSc that we have, we always start from the perspective of the individual itself, because when you understand yourself, you develop the kind of self awareness that you need in order to recognize when you're not operating from a healthy, client centric kind of place, and ultimately you know how to course correct when you slip up. And I think when you're in the midst of trying to close deals and you really want the signature on the dotted line, it's easy to want to get into that mode of maybe lacking a bit of patience, but you've really got to know how the customer wants to be sold to, and effectively that's going to increase a relationship for the long term, right? So I guess from that perspective, though, from your experience with like coaching and other stuff, how do you how big of a shift do you see when you finally see people embrace the mindset first approach?
Well, that's a very interesting question, Eddie. When I think about this, I don't just think about the business and the relationship with customers, but even the relationship with, even with our own kids, because
Yeah.
you are making a negotiation with them all the time. So sometimes I think that you can have a perfect presentation, a perfect statements. People may think that that's fantastic, but sometimes people need to discover themselves, right?
Hmm.
So I think the shift is really massive, right? So when you help people to develop this reflective practice, suddenly they start to discover themselves and making better decisions in real time. So then they are more adaptable, and most importantly, they become ethical and sustainable performers,
Hmm.
right? So
Hmm.
we truly believe in this, and it's not, of course, in our consulting element, it's not always easy because customers are all the time looking for you to give a piece of advice. But sometimes you need to make the right questions to make them think and do a discovery or co-discovery of something, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think it's a lot of what we preach here at Consalia, right? Especially within the coaching module, we learn around like effective questioning and how that helps unlock your sales team's performance because they are able to act on their own, don't need a lot of hand holding. And I think what's most important with that is though through effective questioning you actually get a lot of critical reflection out of it. You're forcing that person to think, right? You're forcing that person to pause, stop, reflect, and really think about their actions and how that might lead to good consequences or bad consequences. And again, to my point earlier around um, having the need to then course correct, right? I think that's super super important.
Yeah, and it's not always easy, right? Because
Mm.
we are always in rush, trying to deliver outcomes, trying to demonstrate what are the next steps, what are the best advice. So making a stop in the journey and to reflect about if this is the right things or not. I mean, yesterday we were having a nice session with a customer, and Philo was explaining a very nice case where, one tech company was presented with an RFP, and they turn around the situation by saying, well, maybe you're not doing asking the right things in the RFP. Why don't we discuss that? And through this reflective process, they
Mm.
ended up changing the RFP and delivering much more value, right?
Hmm.
Because then you're when you do this reflecting practice with the customers, then is when you um, put yourself in their shoes, and then you think about the fair box, right? That we always
Yeah.
talk about in our courses and in our consulting, right? So it's like think about the customer of your customer.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so let's talk about why companies are still clinging to old models, even when selling has clearly evolved, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's an interesting one because obviously we are in this whole kind of sales training industry space, and you see a lot of models being thrown around. I'm not going to name them all because I'm sure those who are listening are very well versed in some of those old models. But it's a question of whether or not those models still stay true to the way that the world has evolved, right? But yeah, I mean, Hezes, from your perspective, why do you think companies are still kind of clinging on to these old models?
Well, I think because transactional training is easy to administer and measure, right? Checklists, certifications, compliance modules. It's like a check in the box.
Mm,
It creates a sense of progress on paper, but it's not real transformation. The real transformation, which is what we are really talking about, requires ongoing leadership involvement, coaching,
mhm.
cultural ownership, and quite honestly, and vulnerability, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
yeah, sorry, Ade.
No, no, no. I was just going to say, I think you've highlighted something there within that sentence. That transactional training is easy, um, and a lot of what I think it's natural to humans. We're always going to want to try and find an easy way to do something, right? Um, and I think that's the message here in terms of like, yes, some sales training that you might go on uh, is going to go through like this checkbox list kind of activity, um, you know, creating a sense of progress on paper, but essentially it's easy to do, right? The real kind of effect of real good sales training starts, like I said, with the mindsets, and a lot of that is not easy to administer. It's not easy to measure, but the impact of it is so profound. It's so transformational rather than transactional, right? And we've I'm sure Hezis, yeah, we've seen a lot of what happens when companies actually take the first step for really understanding what transformational sales training could be, right?
Yeah, you're right. Because just adding a tip, a comment on the other thing is that, so we think about how we measure the salespeople. We are talking about sales. Have you done your quota? Have you done? So everything is like transactional flavor, right?
Hmm.
But this is like the ultimate goal. But to arrive to that point, you have to go through different steps, right? And I think that when organizations truly embed capability building, we see not just better salespeople, but stronger leaders emerge. You know,
Yeah, exactly. And I'll just take an example just from the latest cohort that I've been on. Been very fortunate enough to graduate from the Masters in Leading Sales Transformation, and I've seen it firsthand. The cohort members that I worked with for 2 years and 3 months or so. We've all gone through significant transformation within ourselves. We had a wrap up call the other week where we sort of reflected on the journey of the masters, um, and every explanation everyone had, there was such a deep, profound theme of going through real personal transformation. Um, and when you ask them about how that personal transformation helps them now in their sales leadership careers, it's been so impactful the way that they lead their teams through effective coaching, through being able to navigate collaborative change with them. You know, so I mean, I've seen it firsthand, and we've got plenty of student testimonials that talk about it as well, right? And next week we've got even more graduating from the senior sales leadership apprenticeship and the SAP MSc cohort. So there's a group of sales leaders who are graduating from our program who are essentially going to be going out there and advocating for more transformational ways of selling, starting from the mindset and the values and belief systems, right? So it's not theory. We might be a business school, but it isn't theory. It's happening in practice, right?
yeah, I think that transformation is a journey, it's not a destination, right? So I think
Yeah,
transformation, you know, just extending this, starts when you are a baby, you start to talk to your parents somehow, you start to negotiate things. Then you
yeah,
go to the school. I mean, talk with your colleagues. You have all these relationships. You are not selling a physical item, maybe, right? But you are having this conversation. So you are learning through all your life, and then you enter into a company, you get some training. Depending on the company, maybe it's more focused on consultative sales and values, etc., rather than the product itself. Others are more focused on the products. And then maybe you are, you have the luck to have like a structured training like the one we do. And of course, by the way, congratulations, Eddie, for your recent graduation.
oh, thank
Huh?
you.
And this gives you all the tools, the frameworks, and the experience to put into practice then after into your next job, your next role, your next conversation with the customer.
Mm.
Definitely, the development doesn't stop on graduation. I mean, at graduation, it moves far than that, right?
Yeah, exactly. The kind of growth you get from going on a sales education program rather than a sales training program, it becomes self-sustaining, right? Because you've been studying for 2 years, you've been reading all the theories, but most importantly, you've been applying it to your work. A lot of our programs are work-based learning programs, so everything that you do um, within the workshops, you then apply to real life scenarios at work. But in doing so, you, like I said, it becomes self-sustaining. You get into that practice of knowing what, when, and where to apply these theories, and I think that's the hallmark of true capability building, right?
Yeah, we love when we meet our alumni years later, right? And they explain to us how they have progressed since the training with us, the education path with us, either if it's a master or any other one, and how they use the tools, how they use that in their day to day. That's fantastic to hear.
Hmm.
Um, so Eddie, and of course, of course you're head of marketing of Consalia, but you can speak like a form, I mean, alumni now
Yeah,
of the master, right?
I
So
can. Yes.
let's talk about what great sales training actually looks like when you do it right, and what's your take being recently graduated.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because when I speak to a lot of salespeople as well, because yeah, like you've alluded to, I am in marketing, but I essentially have to be the voice of the customer. So when I speak to a lot of customers and salespeople, and they talk to me about sales training that they've gone on, a lot of it is true what they say. The quotes that we talked about at the start of this program. Um, but I think what I've learned here, especially at Consalia, is everything has to start with the mindsets. It's got to start with the values and the beliefs. And a lot of people might say that okay, that's just a lot of fluff, and it's a nice philosophy, but it's actually backed by a lot of research. Our CEO's doctorate explored how customers want to be sold to. It came at it from a values based selling approach rather than one based on skills and competencies, which most sales training is essentially geared towards. And when you when sellers aren't aligned to like the values and beliefs that customers want to see in the selling experience, you create the friction from the start. If they're not showing how authentic that they can be, how well they know the customer through client centricity, and coming to them with proactively creative solutions to their challenges, but also being daring and bold through tactfully audaciousness. It's essentially those are what customers want to see, right? And when you have training programs that take salespeople through embedding those values in their own practice, the effects are so profound, right? And like I said, we've got hundreds of testimonials on how people have really felt the effect of it. Um, because yeah.
Yeah, I think also just to be very consultant in a way. I think we just not are focused on the education element, but we've helped companies to implement this new thinking, and I mean this thinking and this tools, training methodologies, etc. And we have real return on investment. So we have
Hmm.
some cases where we can illustrate to anyone that it might be interested, where we
Yeah.
have helped large companies, large tech companies, to win multi-million deals, or even grow their market share 7 points to
Mm.
versus a control group that was 0.4 point 0.4. So
Yeah.
we really have return on investment real cases that we can show up. So that's not just fluffy
Mm.
or another education business school that is coming with. No, this is real things that really work, right?
Yes, yes, exactly. And I know we're coming to time, but I do want to leave with another analogy. We talk about like how customers want to be sold to. Um, you kind of think, well, why wouldn't salespeople sell to the way and customers want to be sold to? It's like being an engineer building machinery for a customer, knowing full well it doesn't meet the client's specifications, but they ship it anyway. The customer ends up being frustrated, and you damage a relationship. And I think that's exactly what happens in sales when we neglect how customers actually want to be sold to and what values and beliefs they want to share. Sorry, I just had to share that analogy.
No, no, no. Fully. I mean, that's perfectly okay. Mindsets, values, and beliefs are really the foundation, right? Without them, skills collapse under pressure. The training must embed learning directly into live selling environments, and I believe that sales capability building is a continuous transformational process, not really a one-off event, right?
Hmm.
If sales training feels dead, it's because we've stripped out the human transformation, but that back at the center, and suddenly sales training becomes an engine for sustainable long-term growth and both people and organizations. So ask yourself, guys, about these topics. If you want to drop us a comment, drop your one word description of your onboarding experience, or who wants onboarding quality in your organization. If you could redesign onboarding today, what's one thing you will change? I mean, there are fantastic questions. Of course, we are conscious of time. We will continue elaborating on these topics in the future. But yeah, I think we are running out of time. So Eddie, thank you very much for coming today.
No, thank you. It's been great.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. And for all the audience, let's meet next Thursday, same time, same place. Thank you very much.